This is the final presentation of our 2023-2024 Virtual Winter Wildlife Series. Thanks for joining us. Tonight we have Liliana Navas. Liliana is a researcher with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game Division of Subsistence. Lily, please take it away.
Hi, good evening. I'm happy to be here with you today. I would like to thank Burrow Dickman and Paul Bormer from the Wildlife Education Program of the Alaska Department of Fish and Game for organizing this gathering. And I would like to thank everyone attending for your time and the interest. So I'm originally from Brazil. I grew up and lived in Southeast and South Brazil. I went to college to study oceanography. This means the environments, the animals, and the plants that live in the oceans and the coastal areas. And this led me to work with research about marine and coastal birds. So Brazil is the only country in South America that speaks Portuguese. We ended speaking Portuguese after colonization. All the other countries speak Spanish. So my accent is from Portuguese from Brazil. I moved to Alaska in part because of my work about 20 years ago. This picture was a long time ago, banding a plover chick. I'm based in Anchorage. And I would like to acknowledge that I live in the Dena'ina homeland. I would like to show my respect to the Dena'ina elders and past, present, and the future generations. In 2007, I started working at the Division of Subsistence of the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. My job title is that I'm a research analyst. And over the years, my work evolved into research combining natural and social sciences. Many of my co-workers at the Division of Subsistence are anthropologists. So I work with the research about the kinds and amounts of birds that people harvest in Alaska. I work with things such as traditional knowledge about birds and outreach and education. Here on this picture, we are doing a bird harvest survey, going house to house with a local research assistant in the community of Savunga. I also work closely with the Alaska Migratory Bird Co-Management Council. The council includes the U.S. Fish and Life Service, the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, and the native representatives from across the state. The council makes recommendations on bird subsistence harvest regulations and other topics related to bird harvest and conservation. So this presentation will cover 3 topics. I will characterize the subsistence way of life in Alaska as a harvest cash mixed economy. Then I will illustrate the role of social sciences in resource management conservation. And I will share some information about subsistence harvest of birds in Alaska and the importance of birds in Alaska Native cultures. So indigenous peoples are a main demographic and cultural part of Alaska. So Alaska is a big land, 366 million acres. This is 2.5 times the size of Texas, but we have a small human population, about 730,000 people. 22% of the Alaska population is indigenous peoples, and this is the highest percentage of indigenous people in any state of the U.S., 22%. So there are 9 large Alaska Native cultural groups that are the different colors in this map. And these groups include 20 Alaska Native languages, which are the different shades of the colors, plus their dialects. So there are about 250 rural communities in Alaska with fewer than 1,000 people. So most of the rural communities are off the road system and can only be accessed by boat or airplane. So this was, you say, the remote communities. The rural communities are the blue dots on this map. and the green dots, mostly towards the middle of the state, there are urban communities. So about half of the indigenous population live in the remote communities. And so this picture shows the post office in the community of Tuksuk Bay in Western Alaska. In Alaska, subsistence refers to a way of life that is centered on fishing, hunting, and gathering. So subsistence is defined in law as the non-commercial, customary, and traditional uses of fish and game for food, clothing, fuel, transportation, construction, art, crafts, sharing, and customary trade. So this definition links subsistence to the culture and traditions of Alaska Native people and other people who have adopted Native values and traditions. Subsistence is not limited to indigenous people, and other Alaska residents may also participate. So under state and federal law, subsistence has priority over other uses of fish and game. So when restrictions are needed to ensure sustainability of resources, other uses will be restricted before subsistence uses are restricted. So other uses will be commercial, sport, and personal use fishing and general hunting. So where subsistence occurs and who qualifies for this priority are main topics in harvest management in Alaska. Subsistence laws and harvest regulations are complex, and there is a dual or overlapping system with the federal and state components. So here on the left side are some involved laws, and on the right side are the management bodies. Harvest research is key for harvest management. Harvest data are needed to document the resource uses, to assess effects of harvest on populations, to evaluate the socioeconomic contributions of harvest, to address allocation users, engage stakeholders, and develop harvest regulations that make sense. So this involves both quantitative information, those are the numbers, and the qualitative information that provides context to harvest numbers. As part of implementing subsistence harvest management in 1978, the state law created the Division of Subsistence within the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. So the division has three primary duties: research and data compilation, data reporting and education, and application of study findings. The division focuses on research applied to address harvest management issues and interact closely with the management bodies, including but not limited to the Board of Fisheries, the Board of Game, and the Alaska Migratory Bird Co-Management Council. So the research that we do can be grouped in three categories. So we do what we call community-based line surveys that portrays 1 year on the harvest activities of a community, including all resources. And the surveys also include questions about demography, the cash economy, sharing of the harvest, food security, and so on. We also do annual harvest monitoring for resources such as halibut and salmon, and you do topic-specific projects for specific management questions. We work in partnership with local communities and other research organizations, and we use methods typical of social science research, including surveys, key respondent interviews, mapping, participant observation, and archival research. Our last estimate for the Alaska-wide total harvest of wild resources was 3.3 billion pounds per year. This was for 2017. So 98.6% of the total harvest was commercial fishing, the blue part of the pie, 0.9% was subsistence fishing and hunting, and 0.5% was other fishing and hunting. So subsistence is the basis for the economic and the social well-being of Alaska remote communities. So over the decades, the research by the Division of Subsistence has identified demographic, cultural, and economic elements that characterize the subsistence way of life in Alaska. And so those are the factors listed there in the screen. As harvest management evolved, including these elements in regulations has been key to support the well-being of our communities. And next in the presentation, I will talk in more details of some of those elements. So subsistence is a mixed economy where harvest and cash support each other. Then the harvests yield more and better resources than the invested cash would allow to buy. So this graph shows employment rates on the vertical axis in several rural communities on the horizontal axis. The red part of the bars are seasonal owned jobs, and the blue part of the bar are year-long employment. So employment rates in rural Alaska are depressed. So these bars are far from reaching 100% there in some cases, and in the rural communities, between 20 and 50% of the adult population are unemployed. And there is also a high prevalence of seasonal owned jobs that are the red part of the bars. Income is not shown in this graphic, but also this tended to be low income jobs. So in these communities, the subsistence sector is more reliable and stable than the cash sector. While the cash income is low in rural Alaska, the cost of living is pretty high. So these are prices at the grocery store in Hooper Bay in 2017, almost $8 for half a gallon of milk and $5 for a pound of bananas. So this prices from 2017 now started to be outdated, but they still give an idea. For example, a pound of bananas in Anchorage nowadays is about 60 cents. So in these economies, people needed to know how to harvest and process the wild foods. The local and traditional knowledge is important part of the economy. Local and traditional knowledge is accumulated over generations by people living in close contact with nature. It's a kind of knowing that blends ecology, geography, history, meteorology, beliefs, philosophy, and ethics. Traditional knowledge is embedded in harvesting practices, how people process and store wild foods, in stories and place names, and in the indigenous languages. And harvesting and sharing wild foods keep the community together and offer opportunities for young people to learn skills and values. So harvests happen year-long following the seasonal cycle of availability of animals and plants. So this pie here, this rounded thing, is the annual cycle of harvests in communities in the Pribilof Islands in the Bering Sea, there in the middle of the Bering Sea. So here are the different resources, and you can see fish is the brown, starting on the outside of the circle, and then marine mammals, this kind of dark sage color. So fish and marine mammals are harvested along several months of the year. Birds are toward the middle of the circle, mostly between November and May. Then in June, there's harvest of eggs there in yellow. And the harvest of birds includes moors, kittiwakes, ducks, cormorants, and auklets. So for subsistence users, it's important that the harvest regulations allow access to the resources when they are seasonally available. So nowadays, people in the remote communities also buy food in stores, but the subsistence food production still adds up. So this graph shows harvest of wild foods in pounds per person per year in the vertical, and the rural communities in blue and the urban communities in red. So the total harvest of wild foods in rural Alaska was 31 million edible pounds per year, and this is 3/4 of a pound per person per day. The wild foods have a high nutritional value. So this graph shows contribution of wild foods as percentage of the daily requirements of protein in blue, and the daily requirements of calories in red. So wild foods provide for all rural areas 176% of the daily protein needs and 25% of the daily calorie needs. So this only shows protein and calories, but wild foods are also very rich in other nutrients and support a much healthier diet than processed foods. So replacing this nutritious wild foods with store-bought foods in rural Alaska would be tremendously expensive. Usually up to about 30% of households in a community do most of the harvest. So this graph shows fish harvesting in some rural communities in the Yukon and Kuskokwim area. And in the vertical axis, the cumulative percentage of harvest, and on the horizontal is the cumulative percent of households. So in this year here, in this community, 23% of the households harvested 70% of the fish. So this pattern is consistent for other resources besides fish and for other regions in Alaska. So the high harvest, what you call super households, share their catches with other households. So in harvest management, season and daily limits evenly distribute harvest opportunities among the individuals. So our research has shown that the individual season and bag limits do not work well for subsistence harvest because the super households are providing for many other households that harvest little or don't harvest at all. Subsistence users harvest hundreds of species of fish, shellfish, and other invertebrates, land and marine mammals, birds and their eggs, and plants. So here now the vertical axis is edible pounds per person per year. On the horizontal axis is regions in Alaska, so urban at the leftmost bar, and going toward the right are different regions in Alaska. The colors in the bars are different categories of resources, starting with salmon, other fish, shellfish, and so on, going towards the top of the bars. So the composition and the amount of harvests vary by region. But maintaining access to a broad diversity of resources is important for food security, so people can harvest different things depending on when they are available and varying by year or other factors. And also access to this diversity of resources is very important to maintaining traditional knowledge. Okay. So in rural Alaska, about half of the harvest is salmon and other fish, followed by land and marine mammals, and birds and eggs, shellfish, and plants are 3 to 4% each. And the proportions on this pie refer to edible pounds. So birds and eggs are a small part of this total, but they are important subsistence resources because of the timing of the harvest is often critical. So in many regions, traditionally, migratory birds and their eggs were and still are harvested in spring when other resources are scarce. So when migratory birds arrive back to Alaska in the spring, they fill a gap in the seasonal cycle of harvest. Stork migratory birds alleviated hunger and starvation. And for Alaska Native people, birds and eggs are a survival food from a practical and emotional perspective. In spring, the arrival migratory birds are the first fresh harvest after a long winter of preserved foods. And in the spring, in any time of the year, birds and eggs also add diversity to the subsistence diet, where many meals are fish. So now I'll start focus on birds. Okay. Ducks and geese are 87% of the Alaska bird subsistence harvest. Seabirds are 8%, swans 2%, cranes 2% too, and shorebirds about 1%. So as for the seasonal distribution of harvest, 60% happens in the spring, 10% in summer, and 30% in fall, winter. This is showing only migratory birds, but ptarmigan and grouse are also important subsistence resources, our resident birds. When I say subsistence harvest, I'm referring to the year-long harvest in the regions of the state that are eligible for the spring-summer subsistence harvest of migratory birds. So here are the management regions for the subsistence harvest of migratory birds. It's how the state was divided up for management proposals for migratory birds. And this pie shows the contribution of each region to the total harvest of migratory birds. So harvest in the YK Delta is about 140,000 birds per year, and it's about 1/3 of the total harvest in the state. And this is because the Delta provides habitat for huge numbers of birds, and that this region also has a relatively high human population as compared to other regions. Okay, so this shows harvest in the whole Pacific Flyway. So bird harvest in the whole Pacific Flyway is above 3 million birds per year. And 90% of this total happens as fall winter harvest in the lower 48. There are lots of people here in this, in the other part, the lower 48 part of the flyway. And 80% is year-long harvest in the subsistence eligible areas in Alaska. And 2% is fall winter harvest, mostly in urban areas of Alaska. Now, switching gears a little, I'll give an example of a research project that addressed a topic about the shorebird harvest management. So in my work, I was getting requests for data on subsistence harvest of shorebirds for organizations in US and abroad. So I was hearing about the shorebird harvest, but subsistence users were not very included in this conversation. So with a team of social scientists and biologists, we did a study a few years ago to consolidate the available harvest data to understand the role of shorebirds in indigenous cultures and to document the traditional knowledge. I will not go in detail of the results of the project, just to give a general idea of how a project looks like. So the number of shorebirds that breed in North America dropped by 37%. This means about 1/3 since the 70s. So this happened during my lifetime. So these two images illustrate what this reduction in numbers would look like in a flock of birds. So on the topic is the original photo, and I photoshopped the photo on the bottom to erase one by one the number of birds that represents 37%. So this is what this looks like on a flock of birds. Several factors, and especially habitat loss, have been affecting shorebirds at breeding, migration, and wintering grounds. This is what's causing the bird numbers to go down. So for the harvest estimates, we use data from harvest surveys done in 775 community years over more than 20 years. So this a community years means a harvest survey done in a specific community in a particular year. So just put together lots of data over a long period of time. And for indigenous knowledge component, we focus on the Yupik people of the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta because the Delta is so important also for shorebirds. So we coordinated with the tribal councils and interviewed about 80 people in 5 communities, including men and women, elders, and active harvesters. So the red numbers on this map are the communities where we did interviews and how many people we interviewed in each community. Among other findings, we learned that elders and local residents have seen fewer shorebirds during their lifetime. Older generations were more familiar with the traditional names in the native language, and people were interested in learning more about shorebirds and where they migrate. So based on these findings, we developed a place and culture-based outreach and education program centered on the shorebirds and the Yupik culture of the Waikiki Delta. We partnered with the Wildlife Education Program of the Alaska Department of Fish and Game and to develop the content and the materials. And we work closely with the Yukon Delta Lower, the school district and the local communities. So far, this education program has been used in 15 communities. So we seek to understand the importance of birds as cultural resources for Alaska Native peoples. So cultural resources include material culture, and this include the tangibles. So it's sculptures, painting, and other objects, and architecture with the buildings and such. And the intangible culture, part of the culture include things such as worldviews, ethics, language, education, storytelling, place names, music, and dancing. So let's see some aspects of birds in the material culture. So in Yupik dancing in Western Alaska, men hold feathered fans in both hands, and the feathers amplify the movements of the arms and hands. So this picture was taken in the 40s. You can see the men are using masks there. There are their fans. This is a contemporary dance. And traditionally, snowy owl and swan feathers are the material of choice for the men's dance fans. The women also have a dance fans, but their fans are different. They're made of the hair that caribou has on their throat. And the men's fans are made of feathers. Another example of birds in material culture. So these birds on the top left, they are found in archaeological sites, and they are pieces for a dice game. They are often carved from walrus teeth. So this game perhaps is at the origin of modern bird ivory carvings that are made for sale, such as on the bottom there. So you see the continuity over time. Also here we have grass baskets, and they have motifs weaved in there, and then they have bird feet that are attached on the outside. There are some larger ones, some are very small feet, and those are birds that are not usually harvested on a daily basis. So these baskets are intriguing. Why they put those bird feet in there? I don't often think of bird feet as decoration for a basket, but so these are questions that we ask ourselves. So learning and appreciating cultural diversity may take initiative from us as individuals to ask these questions and to seek answers. Why the bird feet are doing there? Moving to birds as intangible cultural items. There is again our picture of the masked dances. So the old Yupik dance masks, when I say old, it's up to the early 1900s. So these masks represented traditional worldviews. And here you have a mask that shows a bird. So traditional worldviews include the ethics or the rules for how people interact with animals. So this interaction is complex because native people understand animals as aware and sentient beings, but the people also depended on birds for food and to survive. So the old Yupik dances with masks were a way of praying for abundant harvests. For Alaska Native peoples, birds are messengers. Birds alert people about the weather, the arrival of other animals, conditions for traveling, and things to happen in people's lives. So Native people pay attention to unusual bird behaviors. If a small bird lands on a person, it may take away illness. If a bird repeatedly flies over a village, someone will die. So birds that give a bad sign, they're not inherently bad, they're just show what's in the future. So birds provide information because they know what's going on and they behave or respond accordingly. Get information from birds involving paying attention and knowing how birds live their lives. So for example, in winter, ptarmigan with a very full crop indicates a coming storm. So they eat and seek shelter by burning themselves on the snow. Birds singing and breeding displays are a joyful part of the soundscape. So in the spring, the arrival of migratory birds is a special event for northern indigenous peoples and a reliable sign that the long winter is coming to an end. So I will play a quote from a traditional knowledge interview. Let's listen.
The tundra and higher sounds. I go there. It brings you back to health and when it comes alive on the tundra. But I was in the woods last couple of weeks and there's 3 different kinds of birds I've seen, and this not including the snow bunny. And I said, oh, we still have them, because when they leave, I always say goodbye to them and come again. My grandmother said the same thing. I didn't know her, but my sister told me. And then some other where I read to do the same thing because we miss them when they're gone.
So small birds are the focus of children learning to hunt. So as children grow and learn, they move on to larger animals and more powerful hunting tools, but it starts with birds. So this picture is from the 40s when kids used bow and arrows and slingshot. Nowadays, children usually start hunting with a BB gun. So I will play a quote from another interview that talks about that.
When I was growing up, I used a little bow and arrow and slingshot, and like David and Goliath, that sling, you put rock in it, you swirl it around, and you let the rock go. Those were my weapons or my hunting tools, and it teaches a child on how to stalk a bird, without spooking it, and you try to get as close to as possible. That's a challenge, because if you try to shoot it from far off, you'll just, when the rock lands next to it, it'll just spook it. So it teaches you patience to get to the bird. It teaches you how to crawl, if you need to crawl, or stoop down, or hide behind a knoll. You know, it teaches you those skills.
So language is also intangible cultural resource. So Yupik people commonly speak English, but still mostly use bird names in their native language. So this diagram shows how Yupik people name and group shorebirds into categories. Some names imitate sounds. So I'll play the voice of a bird. Which bird is this one? Well, when you pick, it's called the tvat tvat. Tvat 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 tvat. And in English is the bird-tailed godwit. And here's the sound of another bird. Which bird is this one? So when you pick is kukukwak, kukukwak, or the Wilson snipe. And some names describe shape. For instance, this category here, suherpak, is a category for all shorebirds with a long bill, such as kukukwak and tvatva. Suherpak means long bill. Okay. And place names bring together geography, ecology, language, oral history, and more. So in an interview, we learned about the Tvatvak Bay. So Tvatvak is the Yupik name for godwits, and this kind of shorebird with a very long bill. And here's where Tvatvak is in the edge between Bristol Bay and the Waikiki Delta. So zooming in, this is Tvatvak Bay. And this protected and shallow bay indeed looks like the kind of place where Tvatvak would gather in numbers when migrating. Also, music are intangible cultural resources. So closing the presentation here tonight on a happy note, I would like to share a fun Yupik song that invites to sing and dance with the sandpiper and the gull. The song was recorded by Jojin Paul in the 70s or 80s, and he started telling that it's his grandfather's song. So here is the Yupik lyrics and the translation that Rebecca Naimin translated the song for us. So there go the Zoya, or the swinging birds, by Jojin Paul. So that was what I have for the presentation. Thank you for being here and for listening. Koyana, thank you.